In this video, I am going to look at a game I played last Tuesday in a Sussex League match for Horsham 1 against East Grinstead 1. The match was played at Horsham. I was on board 3. I had the black pieces and was up against Peter Kemp. My opponent started with d4, his usual choice, and I responded with knight f6, knight f3, g6, aiming for the King's Indian. My opponent played g3, which can lead to the usual lines of the fianchetto variation should white follow up with a subsequent c4, but it's also possible that white might decide to omit c4, which leads to a rather boring line where white is trying to prevent black's counterplay rather than achieve anything active. Anyway, I responded with bishop g7, and after bishop g2 played c5, which cuts across white's possible intention to play these non-c4 lines. Now, white can obviously try various things here, but he decided to play c4, heading back towards the main lines of the fianchetto variation, which is probably his best approach. I responded with castles, and my opponent castled. Note that white cannot exploit the fact that black has not yet played d6 with d takes c5 because of queen a5 check, knight and f to d2, queen takes c5, and black is fine here because of the awkward positioning of white's pieces. After castles, play went d6, knight c3, knight c6, and now white went for d5, which is his most critical continuation. The idea is that after black's response, knight a5, white hopes to demonstrate that the a5 knight is out of play. Now, c4 is attacked, and there's more than one way to defend it. White decided to play knight d2, and now black aimed for a kind of modern Benoni structure with e6, although it has to be said that the knight on a5 is not on the typical square for the modern Benoni. After rook b1, it's useful for tactical reasons for white to get his rook off the long diagonal. Now b3 is more of a possibility because there won't be the tactical issues down the long diagonal. Black played e takes d5, c takes d5, bishop d7. The idea is to be able to play b5 with a counterplay on the queen side. Now, white played a3, intending b4, trapping the knight on a5, but this move seems a bit dubious to me because it creates a weakness on b3, and even if white gets in b4, it will leave c4 weak. b3 intending bishop b2 would have been more sensible, although after b5 black creates counterplay and is perfectly fine in this position. In response to a3, black played rook c8. Now b4 is no longer threatening to win a piece, as we shall see, but although this is a sensible move, perhaps c4, fixing the weakness on b3, would have been even better. After rook c8, white probably should have given up on the idea of playing b4 and just played the solid b3, looking to develop his bishop on c1. But he ploughed ahead with b4, and after c takes b4, a takes b4, black had a choice of good continuations. One possibility was rook takes c3, when b takes a5, queen takes a5, rook takes b7, bishop a4 looks good for black. And even after the better bishop b2 instead of b takes e5, rook c8, b takes a5, queen takes a5, black seems to be doing well here. So that was one way of continuing. The other was, instead of rook takes c3, to play knight c4, which was black's choice in the game. Then play went queen b3, b5, supporting the knight on c4, knight takes c4, rook takes c4, bishop b2, and now black decided the best way to improve his position was to play rook e8, moving the rook onto the semi-open e-file. Black now stands better, I think, and it's difficult for white to find a good way to continue here. White now played rook on f to e1, which I think is rather dubious because it weakens the f2 square. Instead, I think rook a1, moving the rook onto the semi-open a file, would have been a better way to continue, although I still prefer black's position after queen b6. Anyway, after rook on f to e1, black was not entirely sure how to continue here. He settled on the rather cautious a6, but there was actually a very strong move here, exploiting the weakness of f2, and this was knight g4. Now, this sets up a possible assault on the f2 square based on putting the bishop on d4 and queen on f6. And in fact, there are some more specific threats. So for instance, if white plays h3, trying to drive the knight on g4 back, black has knight takes f2. And after king takes f2, bishop d4 check, white is in terrible trouble. King f3 is met by queen f6 mate, and king f1 by queen f6 check, bishop f3, bishop takes h3 mate. White therefore has to play e3, but after queen f6 check, king g1, bishop takes c3, black regains the sacrifice material with interest, while white also has a number of weak pawns. So this looks like it's just winning for black. Now, instead of playing h3 after knight g4, white could try the defensive knight d1, but then black has the sequence a5, hitting b4, and after b takes a5, queen takes a5, hitting the rook on e1, and actually when you look at it, black is just winning here as well. although it's not quite as drastic as in the previous variation. So after knight g4, white's best attempt is e3, but then black can continue to increase the pressure on the king side with the move h5 intending h4, and black has a strong attack here. However, black, although he noted the move knight g4 in passing, didn't realise quite how strong it was, and as I said, played the more cautious a6 instead. Now, white didn't play the strongest move and allowed black the chance to play knight g4 once more. What he should have played was rook a1, a subtle move with the idea that after knight g4, knight d1 is now possible, because unlike in the line that we just saw, white is preventing black from playing a5. So after rook a1, white is doing okay, although black still has his chances. Anyway, instead of rook a1, white played bishop f1, and once more black had the chance to play knight g4, which seems even stronger now than previously. Once again, h3 fails to knight takes f2. For instance, king takes f2, queen f6 check, and now whether the king goes to g1 or g2, white is in terrible trouble. For instance, king g1 is met by queen d4 check, king h1, queen e3, hitting both c3 and g3, and if rook on b to c1 covering c3, then after queen takes g3, white is obviously losing here. If instead of king g1, white plays king g2, then black has the tactical possibility of bishop takes h3 check. The idea being after king h3 to play rook e3, setting up the possibility of queen h4 check, since the g pawn will be pinned. So white could try king g2 to prevent this possibility, but then black has to sacrifice rook takes g3 check, and after king takes g3, queen g5 check, white's exposed king obviously is not going to last long here. Once again, instead of h3, white could try knight d1, but once again this fails to a5, and after b takes a5, queen takes a5. Now, this means that white would probably play e3, but here knight e5 is very strong, threatening knight f3 check, which is now a possibility since the bishop has retreated from g2 to f1. Anyway, that's what black should have played, but instead he played the more pedestrian rook c8. This move was prophylaxis against e4 by white. Play then went rook a1, white seizes the semi-open a file, queen b6, and now white should probably have played knight d1 when he's probably doing all right, but instead he played the weakening h3. Now, I was convinced that there must be some tactical way to exploit this move, but was unable to find it, and ran my clock down to 9 minutes left plus increment, which left me under considerable pressure for the rest of the game. I spent some time trying to make rook takes c3 work, but without success. Now, bishop takes c3 would lose to knight e4 with a double attack on f2 and c3, so white would have to play queen takes c3, but now he just seems to be winning. For instance, there was the spectacular queen takes f2 check, but after king takes f2, knight e4 check, king g1, knight takes c3, e4, white's material advantage should prove decisive. And after the more restrained, instead of queen takes f2 check, knight h5, play could go queen d2, bishop takes b2, queen takes b2, knight takes g3, bishop g2, and again white's material advantage should prove decisive. The move which I was unable to find, but which was suggested by Stockfish later, was rook e3. Now, the immediate point of this move is that after f takes e3, queen takes e3 check, followed by knight h5, leads to a decisive advantage for black. His kingside attack is too strong. Here, black benefits from the fact that the knight on c3 is pinned to the undefended queen on b3. Instead of f takes e3, white could try bishop g2 when black plays knight h5, and again f takes e3, queen takes e3 check is winning. And if instead of f takes e3, white plays rook on a to c1, protecting the knight on c3, black has another spectacular blow in knight takes g3. Now, f takes e3, queen takes e3 check, king h2, knight h5 is once more winning, and f takes g3 is met by the decisive discovered attack rook takes c3 check. So that's the move that I should have played, but it has to be admitted that it would not have been an easy sequence to find. Instead of either of those moves, I decided on knight h5, which still leaves black with a small advantage, but lets white back into the game. Play went knight d1. White looks to exchange off black's strong dark squared bishop on g7. Bishop e5. Black wanted the exchange to occur on e5 so he could bring his rook to that square, although perhaps bishop takes b2 was slightly more accurate. Now, queen takes b2 is not possible because of knight takes g3, exploiting the pin on the f pawn, so white would have had to have played knight takes b2, dragging his knight to an inferior square, and after knight f6, black is probably slightly better because of his superior pawn structure. Anyway, the game went bishop e5 and play went bishop takes e5, rook takes e5, bishop g2, and maybe knight f6 looking to put pressure on the d5 pawn would have been best. Instead, black played rook on c to e8, looking to put pressure on white's e pawn. Now, white could have played e3, and then the rooks would have looked a little silly because they wouldn't be attacking anything. But instead, white went for queen d3, and black looked to increase the pressure on the king side with f5. Now, white would have been best advised to play a prophylactic move like king h2, getting out of the awkward pin on the f pawn, but instead he completely forgot about this pin and played bishop f3, which allowed black to win a pawn with knight takes g3. White was obviously surprised, and unpleasantly so, by this move, but he composed himself and quickly decided to play knight e3, hoping no doubt to exploit my time pressure. Now, white isn't really threatening f takes g3 yet, because black could just play rook takes e3. However, it would be simplest just to move the knight on g3 out of danger with something like knight e4. And here I think that black is just winning. He's got an extra pawn, and white's pawn structure is badly weakened. However, after knight e3, black thought he saw a winning tactical possibility and played rook takes e3. The idea was, after f takes e3, to play rook takes e3, and it appears that after white's queen on d3 moves, black will have a deadly discovered check. However, it was at this point that black realised that white had rook takes a6 in response, and as a brief examination of the variations will show, it's now white that is winning and not black. So after f takes e3, black was somewhat unnerved by this turn of events, but still found the best continuation, queen d8. The thing is that it turns out that black still has adequate compensation for the exchange, although he is no longer winning as he would have been after the more sedate knight e4. Now, white realised that he was still in quite some danger and started to burn up time himself and came under a certain degree of time pressure. He decided to play queen d4, looking to involve the queen in the defence of his king side. Now, black has a choice of knight moves here. The move played in the game, knight e4, is not the best choice. Instead, knight h5 seems to be pretty good, and black has at least a draw here if white defends accurately. So play could go bishop takes h5, rook e4. exploiting the fact that the bishop is no longer covering this square. Queen a7, Queen g5 check. Now bishop g4, f takes g4, queen takes d7, g takes h3 check, obviously wins for black. This is one of a number of lines where we see that white doesn't quite have enough time to grab the bishop on d7. Although in this variation it really didn't matter whether he took the bishop or not, he was still losing. Instead of bishop g4, white should play king h2, and after queen takes h5, queen takes d7 is again bad because of rook takes e3, and black will crash through on h3, and white does not have perpetual check. Instead of queen takes d7, white should play rook a3, bringing the rook up into the defence of the e3 pawn, and after rook h4, threatening the h3 pawn, again queen takes d7 loses to rook takes h3 check this time, so white should play e4, defending the pawn on h3, and after rook takes e4, queen d7, rook takes e2 check, rook takes e2, queen takes e2, black has perpetual check. So that's what black should have gone for, but instead he decided on knight e4, which, although it's not losing, isn't quite as good. Now black is threatening queen h4, and so white has to decide what to do about it. Now the soundest white continuation is bishop g2 covering the h3 pawn. However, he decided to play king h2, which also covers the h3 pawn but is somewhat looser. The thing is that white will probably have to play bishop g2, but it's not certain that he wants to play king h2. Now here black, who was, as I have mentioned, rather short of time, did not see the tactical possibility of f4, giving up a piece for excellent compensation. So for instance, after rook g1, knight f2 attacks both the pawns on e3 and h3, while after bishop takes e4, obviously the critical move, queen h4, bishop g2, rook takes e3, it turns out that white's only move is rook f1. Now rook takes h3 check looks tempting, but white can now just play king g1 and he's actually winning here. So instead of rook takes h3 check, black should play rook takes e2, and he has adequate compensation for his sacrifice material. One immediate threat is queen takes h3 check, exploiting the pin on the g2 bishop, when after king g1, queen takes g2 is mate. White can avoid this, but black seems to be doing fine. However, rather than playing f4, black chose the rather more obvious queen h4, but after rook g1, f4, bishop g4, bishop takes g4, rook takes g4, queen f2 check, rook g2. White was obviously consolidating his position and had a considerable advantage. Now, black's objectively best continuation was queen takes e3, exchanging queens, although after queen takes e3, f takes e3, rook takes a6, he has a pretty grotty endgame. Perhaps he could try to exploit the weakness of white's pawns with rook e5, but this still looks very good for white. Instead, he gambled with queen h4. But now, rook f1, bringing the rook over to the king's side, would have consolidated white's position. There's really nothing that black can do here, and white is completely winning. However, instead of rook f1, he played e takes f4, which gave black a chance. Now I saw queen takes f4 check, king g1, knight g5, but did not realise that after queen takes f4, knight takes h3 check, king h1, knight takes f4, I had enough for the exchange despite queens being swapped due to white's weak pawns. Instead of taking on f4, I chose the inferior knight f6. I was kind of hoping that white would play the careless queen f2 when he loses the queen after knight g4 check. The point being that rook takes g4 is simply met by queen takes f2 check. White actually slipped up, not quite this drastically, but by playing queen d3. Something like e3 would have been better, consolidating his position, defending the pawn on f4 securely, and white would have been completely winning here. But instead he played queen d3, and here again I had the chance to play queen takes f4 check, and after queen g3, queen takes b4, I would have had enough for the exchange due to white's weak pawns. However, instead of this I played knight e4, and after queen f3, white was again clearly winning. Play now continued for a while, with white trying to consolidate his position and black trying to pull off some tactic. Queen f6, attacking the rook on a1. Rook takes a6. Knight d2, attacking the queen on f3. Queen f2. Knight c4. Rook a2. Rook e4. Now white decided to go on the offensive with f5, and black is pretty much forced to try to keep things closed with g5, but now the g pawn is a considerable weakness. Queen f3, rook e5, e4, rook e7, queen g3, h6, rook on g to e2, h5. Black decided to take some active measures in desperation, but this obviously creates further weaknesses on the king side. Rook g2, rook g7, rook a8 check, king h7, queen f3. Now the weakness of the h5 pawn is particularly inconvenient. g4. Black just had to try this. H takes g4, knight e5, queen h3, rook g5, g takes h5, rook takes g2 check, king takes g2, queen g5 check. Now, up to this point, white had played soundly, especially given the fact that he was under a bit of time pressure. But here he slipped up with king h1. What he should have played was queen g3, forcing queens off because of the attack on g8 should the black queen on g5 move away. And then obviously he would have been completely winning. But instead he played king h1, and now black had one final opportunity, and that was to play queen f4. And here it seems that black will be able to force perpetual check due to the exposed white king. However, black checked immediately with queen c1, check, but now white was able to evade the attempt to force a perpetual with king h2, queen d2 check, queen g2, queen f4 check, queen g3, knight f3 check, king g2, and here black resigned before losing on time. Play could continue, knight h4 check, when white would play king h3 and black no longer has any checks, and moreover his knight is in considerable trouble here. So it's all over.